Roll call.
Yeah,
You make the motion.
There you go.
I'll say second.
All right. Well, I need to be recording this, so.
I just pressed record, Chris.
Okay, thank you.
And,
Yep.
yeah, and you all need to read it out loud into the record.
Yes.
Yeah, usually one of the board members reads it.
Can someone put it up on their screen?
I have it here.
Okay,
My screensaver just dropped. Okay. I move to certify that the declared nature of the declared COVID-19 emergency makes it impractical or unsafe for the Water Resources Committee to assemble in a single location, and further that the agenda items to be taken up at this meeting are necessary to continue operation and discharge of lawful purpose, duties, and responsibilities of the committee. I make that motion.
Second.
Steve Lucas approves.
All right. So motion carries. All right. Thank you all.
Oh, yeah, aye.
Makes it easier. There's only two. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to have a chance for us to get together. I know it's been a while, really since March or maybe even February, that the committee has had a chance to meet. You know, throughout that time, I've been able to provide updates as well as Mary and Lisa to the committee and the board. But just in general, wanted to kind of have a chance for everyone to gather. Looks like we've only had two today, but moving forward, this is something I'd like to try and have us meet as a committee, especially as programs kind of continue through COVID and kind of figuring out how we manage these programs, like our septic program, VCAP, and obviously the locality programs, CCAP and ACAP. Kind of get things started, just providing some, right now we're just going to provide some general updates, and then maybe have a little bit of discussion on each item. Some of these are going to require more discussion, but just wanted to kind of start off. Mary, do you want me to provide those UVA stormwater updates, or is that something you'd like to kind of get started? You're on mute there. Yeah, I'll mute you.
I just started speaking while I was on mute. I'm sorry, everyone.
It's okay.
This is the first time I've done this on my phone, so it's a little different. So yeah, I wanted to give an brief update on UVA plan review, continuing to move forward with that. I've finished recertification that was due in October with DEQ for my plan review status. I received 5 plans in the last 2 weeks from UVA, which is kind of a bit of a personal record. I don't think I've received that many in such a short period of time before. So I'm working through those and trying to get all those together and reviewed and returned within the 30-day time period. I'm working with the folks at UVA that send those plans, and they have kind of an internal priority list. So they're a bit flexible in that 30-day turnaround with their priorities in mind. We had some discussions about maybe UVA planning to train some internal staff to take on some of this plan review, but I think with COVID and with DEQ trainings being held up right now, all of that is on hold. So just continuing to move forward with that, and that's the extent of my update.
Okay. Thanks, Mary. Yeah, I just saw that I just got an email from DEQ last week about their training schedule and updates. So I'm hoping to take a look at those as well and see what they've come up with. So it should be interesting. All right. Now we're going to move into septic program updates. Lisa.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple really brief updates in the septic world. Our current septic programs that we have going on right now is our ongoing TIE TMDL program in Nelson County, and then our hardware program in Albemarle and a part of Fluvanna. The hardware program is coming to its final end at the end of December. As of right now, I looked at the numbers briefly yesterday. We have a little over $3,000 in cost share that is unobligated for the hardware. I'm certainly happy to spend that money if we get some projects in. It's not quite enough for system replacements, but it could be a series of pump outs or a low-cost repair that we could do to completely allocate all that money. Haven't had a lot of applications come in for that program as of recent, so we'll just kind of see where things go. But overall, even if we're left with $3,000 in unobligated funds, I'm pretty happy seeing that. I think you all remember at one point we had over $100,000 that wasn't moving out the door. So I'd say that's a pretty good run for that program that really struggled for quite a while. Our TIE TMDL program, I think this was mentioned at one of the board meetings recently. We did submit for another round of funding for the TIE. We submitted that on August 31st. We applied for a little over $96,000 in septic funding and about $156,000 in ag funding. We have submitted the request to DEQ. If we are approved for that, it would start in October of 2021 and would run till the end of December of 2023. So we're hopeful that we'll get it. Obviously, this would be the third round of funding in that watershed for us, and we've shown that we can allocate that money quite easily. In fact, the septic funds that we have going on right now for the second grant are actually almost gone. I think I have under $1,000 left. So there is, in the septic world, definitely no shortage of need in that area. And Luke and I both felt really confident that we could spend $96,000 in septic funding, no problem. And then on the opposite side, Luke felt very confident that he could spend $156,000 in ag projects in that area. He has quite a bit of leads on potential projects in the watershed. So we'll keep everybody posted on that. Fingers crossed that we get that funding so we can continue our work down there. And that's all I have, unless anyone has some questions about any of that.
Yeah, I have a question. I was kind of wondering the pretty stark difference between the TIE and the hardware. As these TMDL processes come up, reflectively, are there ways that it could have been known, for example, that the TIE had such a need for septic and the hardware didn't?
That's a good question, Lonnie. You know, the hardware came about right when I was coming on board at the district, so I wasn't involved in the decision making of whether or not to go for that watershed. I think so I don't know what kind of factors helped them decide whether or not to go for that or not. I think moving forward, I think it may be helpful for us to, if we can evaluate I think an easy thing we could do would be to evaluate the age of the homes in the watershed. I think we all can agree that we're pretty certain that a lot of the properties in the hardware are a lot of newer homes. It's not all new homes, but it's a larger proportion of newer homes that likely do not have failing septic systems, where in the TIE, it is a lot of older homes, you know, probably built on poor soils or, you know, places where they probably shouldn't have been built. So that would be, I think, something that we should definitely consider when we're looking at new watersheds to do these types of projects. You know, what's our outreach strategy going to be? What's the age of the homes? Another piece of it that we've struggled in the hardware is that it's a really large area and it's pretty rural, and there wasn't a lot of opportunities to do really targeted outreach. You know, besides, yes, we did the mailing, the cards, and yeah, we hung up posters at some gas stations, but it was so spread out. I know I just struggled with trying to get the word out in that area. And you know,
So speaking of that in terms of the age of the homes, I mean, that data is in the county GIS, for Albemarle at least is in county GIS.
yes.
And I wonder, did we consider doing anything like getting an extract from the county of the oldest oldest homes in the area and just send a direct mailing out to those people?
I know we discussed doing that back when we had quite a bit of septic funding left, when we were up, you know, $100,000. I know we talked about doing that. And then for whatever reason, the program started moving and I started allocating quite a bit of the money. And so we did not follow up on that. We did do 2 postcard mailings to everyone within the watershed for this program, for the ag and the septic side of things. But to answer your question, no, we did not end up doing that because the program started picking up momentum for various reasons. But that is a good, I think that's a good tactic to use because that, like you said, that information is readily available to us.
Thanks.
Bonnie, this is Ann. Just also to tie in the hardware, both had already been applied for before I started as well. So I'm not sure what the thought is. There have been some instances where we have declined. For instance, the Cunningham Creek, I think. There are certain areas that are just so, the TMDLs are such a small area that it's not practical for us to apply for a grant when we know that there's just, you know, the enormity of applying for the grant, administering the grant, reporting on the grant, doing the outreach doesn't fit with some of the watershed sizes. And that's been a concern we've expressed to DEQ. But I don't, know if that's going to change. I did also speak with Laurel Williamson at Albemarle County and Dominique with the PDC about coming up with some analysis of the new homes versus not new homes, the age, et cetera, to see if we could refine that a little bit better, at least in our district. So just wanted to give you an update. I am hopefully going to be working on some more septic discussions as a result of that Rivanna River Basin presentation on a statewide level and certainly more on a local level about how we can adjust how the program is set up so that we don't end up in a situation we have like the hardware, for instance. So
I also wonder too, I hope at some point, and I don't know when the cutover is, and I know there's still whole discussions of WIP 3, but it'd be nice to start including VCAP type practices. I feel like if those were on the table for the hardware, we could have allocated that money.
So Lonnie, the VCAP is already recognized, or the VCAP type practices are already recognized by some TMDLs and by DEQ. The challenge is that while they may be eligible, they are not for certain types of impairments. So unless the impairment, I believe, is, Chris, jump in here. I know you know the answer to this. If the impairment is sediment, for instance, then wait, no, is it? I'm sorry. If the impairments are fecal coliform, then the VCAP BMPs are not going to be eligible, even though they may be listed for some reason, and they are. Mm-hmm. Depends on what the impairment is for, or whether or not the VCAP practices would, and most all of them now, I believe, don't. Very few of them have sediment. At least that seems to be the trend.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean that seems to me like there's two things that need to happen there. I know I'd lose track of their old name. It used to be Rivanna Conservation Alliance. Mm-hmm. A lot of their testing is around bacteria and benthic impairments. I wonder if maybe we should be encouraging them to look more at sediment. Because I know so much of the local data at least comes from them, not in the hardware, obviously, but the other thing I wonder too is there seems to be a gap in research. I mean, I think that we all intuitively know that some of these practices also would help with reducing bacteria in rivers, but we just don't have any research demonstrating that. And I don't know who we could reach out to or what partners we could reach out to start doing that research to show that things like stream buffers do decrease bacteria in your stream, or for that matter, rain gardens.
Yeah, we've had this discussion with James Martin, and you know, I think it's important. I don't know that, you know, changing all of DEQ's. I do agree though that the local inputs can have an influence. Chris, I know knows more about this. We've had several discussions, and Chris, what's the latest you've heard, or what are you hearing?
So yeah, in relation to that, there is no kind of what Lonnie, like you were saying, there isn't a measure or a standardized calculation for the impact on bacteria. So that's kind of why it's been why that's not added into any VCAP practices. You know, there's standard measures and standard formulas that we can use, you know, with our, you know, entering information into our, you know, the ranking spreadsheets and all those types of things. But right now there isn't a standard recognized, you know, practice or calculation for removal of bacteria. And yeah, I don't have a sense that VCAP is going to be making that shift towards those. That's something, you know, we do have locality programs that are available. So, you know, Albemarle and Charlottesville, if there's a way to have those enter into those programs, then the county and city could report out for removal of bacteria. But again, I don't know what the standard that would be set for that. So allowing those inputs to give us the removal levels. And I think it's maybe that research or for these smaller practices, you know, considered residential practices, probably why they're not factored in as much is because you know, when we're talking about stream buffers, you know, on an agricultural scale or larger scale, you know, we're doing, you know, hundreds and maybe even thousands of feet of linear buffers versus a, you know, 200 square foot rain garden. Not to say it doesn't have an impact because it all adds up, but to justify the time spent to figure out those numbers, maybe that's where that kind of disconnect is.
Well, I mean, if you look at the hardware, for example, you can see geese in the aerial photographs, and you can see people mowing right up to the waterways. And so that right there is a direct bacterial contribution that would be removed with taller vegetation and or because geese don't like taller vegetation. So, but once again, can I point to a spreadsheet that says that by installing taller vegetation, you reduce the bacterial load by this percentage? I don't have that, and I don't know that research has been done. I don't know who we'd reach out to if this could be a citizen science project, or if there's some other way that we could get information about that. But it seems like there's a big gap there that could have a big benefit if someone would put in the time and research. Okay.
I mean, that's a good question. That's something I can ask the VCAP steering committee and Kevin. I mean, you know, it's all about what inputs can be put in. These are all meant to feed the Bay model. So if there's something out there that can help with that might already be existing that I might not be aware of, you know, be worth just asking around. So
I mean, go out and walk around any closely cropped water body, you know, a water body with a lot of mown grass around it, and you'll see geese droppings.
Right.
Just saying.
Yeah, no, it's a good point about trying to find a way to add bacteria into that, because I mean it's one of the top concerns that most localities and MS4s have. So, okay. But yeah, thanks for that. I'll definitely do some research into that, and if anybody else finds anything, please let me know.
Thanks.
And this is Steve. Do we have any kind of update on where we stand with our Area 2 legislative move to increase the septic system cost share?
Yeah, they killed it. Laura Grape and I put together some information for the legislative packet, and I think it was decided that due to optics that they wanted to only, they wanted to keep their list limited because of funding from the state, and so to not ask for everything under the sun. I also think it needed, there was a fair amount of discussion about more work needs to be done to determine what are the appropriate organizations to be involved and to have kind of a statewide sort of working group. That's, Laura and I had hoped that there would be a study of some sort, and that would not really cost a whole lot, but that didn't make it onto the association's legislative agenda. It doesn't mean though that we can't move forward with recommendations like Lonnie's suggesting, certainly reaching out to local partners. There was a lady on the call, Lonnie, and I don't, you may know her name was Betsy, I believe. She was on the Rivanna River Basin Commission presentation, I should say. I saw her speak up several times on septic. She seems to be very passionate about it. And then the PDC is also very interested in pursuing it as well. It's part of their mandate from some of the grants they have with DEQ. So I think that there's some opportunities for us to continue to explore it, but the association was not at a comfortable and did not feel comfortable adding it to their legislative agenda.
I wonder if it would be helpful when we bring this up before the association again, if not from the floor, to have a letter with signed partners like localities, other conservation organizations that support this, because it does seem like there's a broad base of support. I can't remember exactly. I think that one person you're talking about was actually a board of supervisor for Albemarle County.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember which one, but I think she was one of the Albemarle supervisors.
Okay. The PDCs have definitely taken this on as one of their sort of projects as well. So I think that there could be some collaboration on this front. And I keep in mind too, most districts out of 47 in Virginia don't have a septic program. I want to say there may be 10. So we're sort of, I can't say that this has been something that all districts statewide are like really fired up about. And well, they don't know about it, or they don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the capacity. If they only have, 2 employees and their primary focus is ag, they may not have the bandwidth to bring on, and grants, come and go. So it can be difficult to manage a program when it's has short-term. But I'm not saying that they wouldn't be interested. I'm just saying that there haven't been a whole lot of districts with a lot of experience doing it.
Well, keep in mind originally VCAP was just our district in Culpeper, right? So, and now VCAP is statewide. So I think we have a history of innovating and programs that spread well beyond our district.
Yeah, and I haven't heard any district that has done septic say they don't want to do it anymore. So that's a good sign too. I haven't heard any say. I mean, I know there are days where Lisa and I don't ever want to see a DEQ report again, but as far as the reporting part, that can turn people off pretty quick. But as far as like doing the septic work and providing that service, I really haven't heard anybody say they're not interested.
Thank you, Ann.
Okay. Is there any other discussion? Seems like we've kind of been able to cover most things for septic. Thank you, Lisa. All right. So on to kind of some next items here. Just want to give a quick update about our involvement with the Rivanna Stormwater Education Partnership. This year has definitely been a change for all, and our step is no exclusion. Normally we're as a part of the partnership with UVA, as far as our localities, UVA, Albemarle County, City of Charlottesville, and a number of other partners. You know, typically springtime is the big time for a lot of environmental programs, outdoor, you know, gatherings, education, outreach opportunities. We kind of had to make a shift this year. I'm sure as you have seen in many of my updates about how we've been kind of making a shift and updating the website, updating. There's a GIS story map which kind of tells the overall story of the Rivanna watershed, kind of where things flow, how things might impact the water quality of the Rivanna. So we did have a shift, and I want to really thank Amy for doing a lot of heavy lifting and getting the website to where it is now. If you remember the RCEP website before, it was very basic, but now we've included kind of give it an updated look, a lot more user friendly, and then adding a lot of education documents and outreach documents to the website and resources for folks to use, especially as many parents are having to do homeschooling, or there's the social distancing and education, kind of doing virtual education. We've kind of added those items for people to use. During that period, we also had a short campaign, the Love Your Watershed campaign, which definitely saw an uptick. We kind of launched that in May. We saw an uptick in folks interacting on our social media, as well as the city, county, and UVA social media. So it's good to see that people are interested in kind of interacting with that program. That's something that we're looking at for this upcoming year, is how do we adjust, you know, kind of the new normal, if you will, and updating our outreach and education plan, kind of talking about how we plan to promote RCEP again, you know, coming up in the fall during the social distancing period, and what that looks like. So that's still in the talks with our
Chris,
medical partners.
just to clarify, Chris, when you say your outreach and education plan, just clarify that is the
that is RCEP, yeah.
Yeah, not Thomas
TJ.
Jefferson's plan. It's the MS4 permit holders plan that they're required to do.
Mm-hmm.
Why we're involved.
Correct. Yeah. Thanks for that clarification. So we're still reviewing, you know, how we want to move forward with some campaigns. Hopefully, I think we're having another meeting here at the end of the month, so we'll have some kind of concrete ideas. One thing that we're looking at is, you know, talking to local parks and rec departments about, you know, allowing posting and mounting of signage, you know, to try and get the word out about, you know, different things like pet waste pickup, you know, adding these to trailheads, park signs, kiosks, pet waste stations, and just trying to get messaging where people are. Since we're not able to do tabling events, those types of things, just trying to find other ways to communicate and reach out to, you know, a lot of the users of these systems, especially as they're closer, you know, to the Rivanna waterways. Another exciting update for the RCEP is that the Rivanna Conservation Alliance is now a partner member. It's very exciting to have them join us. They have such a great impact and recognition within the community as doing community events, as getting volunteers. So we're excited to have them kind of join this membership or join this partnership. Something that I'm working with Lisa Wittenborn, the executive director, is working on a Dominion grant, education grant. So we submitted, or rather Lisa submitted a grant, I guess it was, September 11th, and should hopefully hear back by January, February of this year. But overall, the project is discussing, you know, encouraging installation of residential stormwater practices, you know, keying in on local examples. One thing we really want to focus on is a lot of kind of do-it-yourself resources, you know, how-to videos, workshops, an incentive program, you know, creating online resources or self-guided resources for stormwater practices. Still kind of open-ended as what the deliverables could be. So we'll just see what funding comes back to see what we're able to do. But I'm really looking forward to, or hopeful that we do get this grant. I think this could really help bolster some of our local conservation assistance programs. As I'll give an update a little bit later with funding. You know, as funding becomes more competitive and projects are more competitive, we want to have an opportunity to still reach out to homeowners and, you know, give them the tools necessary to install these practices, even without funding. So, you know, that way they can have these videos, these how-tos, and kind of do it on their own, however they see fit. But at least they have something to point to locally.
Hey, Chris, who
Yeah.
who is that grant through again?
That's the Dominion Energy Environmental Education and Stewardship Grant.
Okay, great. And do you know how much it was for? It's okay if you don't, right off the top of your head.
I can't remember. And do you remember how much she put in the entire grant for?
Yes, it was, I want to say around 20,000 in total. And then our portion would be, the funding for our time would be far less, like less than around 2,000. I don't know if that was even, but the primary goal is really for RCA to be the lead on this contract and for us to provide a technical assistance that they could benefit from. And also a little bit, you know, obviously Chris's time, potentially a little bit of Audrey's time in the spring. So part of this also is just, you know, for us to kind of rebuild or have a relationship with RCA where I think would be beneficial since we have so many common interests and common goals.
Okay, thank you.
So Chris, one thing that I've thought for a long time would be a very valuable thing to include in all of our education is it'd be nice to have something for people who live on ponds or lakes about, you know, planting buffers. I think we don't really, you know, there really isn't enough outreach out there to show people how you can have a buffer on a shoreline that's attractive. And we've had so many issues with lakes, with cyanobacteria blooms and other things. I think it's just a really great thing that someone should provide that service of some kind of education outreach to those people.
Lonnie, hey, I love suggestions and ideas, and because I think that they're really invaluable for us to hear from you as directors and obviously members of the public as well. Chris, do you have can you think before the Watershed Resources Committee meets again, could we come up with either a spreadsheet or survey questions or some way for us to start documenting, because then we can kind of have a list of everything we think we're interested in, and then maybe figure out a way to prioritize certain things, because I know that, you know, we could have 10 people working on there's so many things we could do, and it would be fun if we could do them all. Then the question is well, how, you know, if we can't, then how do we pick and choose? And Lonnie, I think that's a really good one. And we get a lot of phone calls in the office just about ag ponds, I mean ponds in general, but it would be nice if there was a way. Now, I don't know if you've seen Debbie's, you guys probably haven't seen Debbie's report yet, but our strategic plan is now due December with the possibility of an extension till spring. So I'm going to need that kind of information, which is really great, Lonnie, to put it together. But at the same time, I kind of got to figure out how do we make sure we capture everything, but then how do we each year then decide on, like, okay, this year we'll focus on, you know, 2 of the 20 ideas, because we just can't take them all. And I think what happens is we get paralysis when we have a gigantic list of so many ideas. We get pulled in so many different directions, and we don't really have a chance to focus on just one, or 2. So if there was a way for us to capture it, Chris and Lisa, maybe in the minutes today, but if as part of this strategic planning exercise, we could do, maybe, Chris, if you could create a list of all the things you've heard, and I know that you could probably reach out to the rest of staff, Mary and the ag team, to hear the kinds of ideas they've heard, and then maybe we could package it up in a way that could be turned into a survey on our website, maybe part of one of our email blasts. You know, what does the community, what do they, you know, and then also we could, you know, do that same survey with our directors, because everybody has such great ideas, but I'm having a hard time figuring out, you know, whose idea gets picked, and I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings.
Yeah.
So I think we've got to figure out a way to capture these ideas without just going, it's a great idea, and then we never tackle it. And I'm not saying we always have a lot of wiggle room to tackle extra projects, but when we do, which ones would those be?
I think the idea of a spreadsheet, maybe up on Google Docs or something, so that we can all collaborate on it, you know, something like that would be a good idea.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just thinking similar to what the MS4 education. So there's documentation that needs to be done. There's certain things that they need to do outreach on, which are high priority water quality issues. So it'll be typically the way it works is that sometimes there are very specific items, such as we are going to produce a brochure about, you know, just like what you said, Lonnie, you know, about how to implement buffers on residential ponds. Then that tackles, it says, all right, well, what are the high priority water quality issues that you're addressing? Nutrients, sediment, bacteria, kind of checking those boxes. And then it says, you know, how many people do you plan to reach out to? So maybe that's something that I can build off of, is saying, you know, here's the items that we're looking at. What water quality issues do they address? And then maybe, you know, building off of that, saying, all right, well, what's the deliverable? You know, maybe even how much time that would take, and what other, you know, resources or input or notes would be attached to that those kind of line items. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Mary's camera came back on. I don't know if, Mary, that's because you wanted to speak or you just happened to pull over. Oh, you're on mute. Mary, you're on mute.
Thank you. Not so good at this on the phone. Yeah, I'm here. I've been listening in, but I'm probably going to have to jump off and say goodbye so I can keep going with my day.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Mary.
Well, thank you.
Spreadsheet sounds like a good idea, Ann.
Yeah, I mean, I think also narrowly, outside of projects that we should take on, I think it would be interesting. I don't know. It'd be interesting to look at some of our conservation practices in terms of urban practices that may need to get more attention than they're getting now, or aren't even on VCAP's radar. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see like how we feel about certain, you know, we've talked about this before, I guess, in terms of considering our ranking, and how we look at various practices. But I think, for example, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like in our particular district, shoreline practices don't get a lot of, don't rank very highly in terms of VCAP anyway.
Are you talking about like native plantings, like conservation landscaping, those types of things?
Yeah, it would be treated as conservation landscaping, I think.
Right.
But in my mind, it really is its own practice. I mean, it's a big difference between being on a lake with a nutrient problem and doing something to address that versus being in a. I mean, I think there's something more specific about it. It's kind of
I think Lonnie, the nuance is that when you say shoreline practice, that is a specific practice within the VCAP manual that doesn't apply in our district. And so what we've kind of said is that, plantings on shorelines can fall under the conservation landscaping program. And I don't think it's a matter of Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, I feel like we are open to anyone who applies. And Chris doesn't typically have a whole lot of funding on an annual basis to focus on. I mean, really, Chris, you were going to give us an update, I'm sure, on the funding. So it's not, Lonnie, that those plantings on shorelines are ineligible. It's not the shoreline practice per VCAP. It's a different. It would be a different. We need to have a different name. But it would be eligible.
I was just saying, I think they might rank differently in areas where they do have that shoreline program. I don't know that for sure. I just got.
The living shorelines do rank really highly, and we can't do those in this area because it's for tidal shorelines. Anytime you're planting a riparian buffer that's 35 feet in width on the edge of a stream bank, that's one of the highest ranking conservation landscaping practices you can do.
Mary, what you're saying is that it already gets a higher ranking. So Lonnie, does that answer? So Lonnie, you were on mute a minute ago, by the way. We didn't hear the end of your sentence. Lonnie.
Sorry, my daughter's also doing band practice, so I cut it off early.
Oh, okay.
Or blasted.
So maybe what you're thinking is maybe specific outreach could be done, not this year, because I think Chris has probably hit his max on funding, but in the future, then maybe we could highlight that riparian buffer for residential conservation landscaping practices that happen to be along ponds or streams are going to be higher ranking. I mean, is that kind of what I'm hearing you say, Lonnie?
Yeah, that's very much what I'm saying. And particularly education, I think there is an aesthetic there that needs to be addressed. It's almost like a social marketing thing. People have this notion that streams mowed up right to the edge are very attractive. And so changing those perceptions that actually a buffer of very attractive wildflowers may actually be much better than that mowed stream. So there's a sort of a notion of changing attitudes about what people are doing in those places. You know, just like we've been able to change a lot of attitudes too, you know, in regards to native plants or other conventions.
Sure.
People have had.
Yeah, Lisa, for whoever's taking minutes, I'm not sure. So it sounds like that's an idea that we put on our list of things we can, that we could look to do a more targeted or a more specific type of outreach in the future. And Chris, again, I know you're going to talk about what funding we have for this year, but going forward, that could be another approach for our overall district outreach, or certainly our residential urban program outreach specific.
Lonnie, can you just repeat, you're saying targeted outreach for what was it? A very specific VCAP practice? Yeah,
so while I realize the VCAP does support buffers, I think part of it is very targeted on helping change the perceptions people have about the aesthetics. Currently, a lot of people with streams, or particularly people that live alongside lakes or ponds, have a perception that the aesthetic of a mowed grass to the right up to the edge of their stream or pond or lake is attractive. And so trying to help shift that narrative and really emphasize how an attractively planted buffer can be better, and maybe get them to think differently about how they're doing that. Because it is, whereas it's very different than sort of the agricultural approach, where I think farmers generally know what they're doing when they're planting a buffer, and it's not really about aesthetics. I mean, it could be a little bit, but.
Great, thank you for that clarification. I added it to the minutes.
I just emailed out a link to a publication that came out of Northern Virginia somewhere. I just happened to Google goose poop, basically. And it's about urban. It's kind of focusing on keeping geese out of the stormwater management ponds in urban areas, but it seems to maybe have some other information, maybe even some statistics that we could
Okay.
use to give us a starting point. So just for y'all to look at for your information.
Thanks, Steve.
And Lisa, for note taking and for like coming up with this draft list. Bye, Mary.
Hey, Mary.
For keeping track of these, Lisa, we can just start a draft, or Chris, if you could start a draft, Lisa, we'll hopefully have whoever's doing minutes, but if we could start a spreadsheet, I guess. And of course, I like your idea of the ranking, or I mean, not the ranking, but putting a column in for what water quality area does it address, et cetera, et cetera. And then it doesn't have to be perfect. We can always send it to Lonnie and Steve and anybody else and ask for, you know, further refinement on the language. So we could have maybe like a topic and then maybe like a bigger section that kind of fleshes out what the need is, you know, why we're talking about this, like with the goose poop and, you know, and then maybe a target audience column. So there could be a whole lot of columns, Chris, you could add into a spreadsheet, but I think as long as we get the gist of it in the minutes, then we can circulate we'll certainly circulate the minutes, and then we can circulate in a spreadsheet to get more refinement. But I really appreciate, Lonnie, all your good ideas, and because I just feel like we have for so long not really been able to capture them in a way that helps us evaluate what's the highest priority.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to change that. The 4 year for our strategic plan for the next 4 years is making sure we capture all these great ideas, but then also figure out what's going to be realistic on our workload.
Great. Thank you, Ann. All right. Well, that's really all the updates for RCEP, and now kind of rolling in to some updates on the conservation assistance programs. I know we only have about 30 minutes left, so don't worry, I'm not trying to cram everything in this meeting and leave it at that. I think we're going to have additional discussion on VCAP and CCAP and ACAP and how all these programs operate moving into the future, but just wanted to kind of start that conversation here today. So I'm going to share my screen for a different item. Pull that up, sorry. All right. Everybody see that, or is it still showing my previous? There we go. All right. So here's just some updates. This is from kind of a lot of this, sorry for the wall of text, but I received an email from Kevin McLean, and I'm not sure, is everybody in the Water Resources Committee, are they a part of the VCAP? Do you receive the VCAP updates? There's a new listserv that they created. If not, I can find out how to get you on there. So Steve or Lonnie, do you receive any emails or updates from VCAP from Kevin?
I don't know.
Okay.
I believe it comes through the all districts. I thought it came through the all district email,
Okay.
but maybe not.
I've seen some updates, and I mean, it's hard to know if you're receiving some updates, if you're receiving all the updates or not.
Yeah.
But I do
Okay.
receive some.
Okay, well, that's fine. And I mean, as many all district emails come through, I definitely don't expect everyone to read through each one, but that's something I can help highlight what some of the important ones are. So here's kind of the general update from VCAP. So with our new fiscal year starting July 1st, as of 8/28, I believe, we have allocated all of the funds, or obligated all the funds for projects. So around $415,000 have been allocated for projects this year statewide. So at this time, all available cost share for VCAP projects have been allocated. There are not any, unless projects cancel, there won't be any additional funding available, and the wait list has kind of already begun. Let's see, last month I think we looked at projects, and there was already a wait list of somewhere around 30 to 40 projects. I anticipate that'll probably continue to grow. So even if a handful of projects do cancel throughout the year, it's going to be pretty tough to receive funding from the statewide program. VCAP is encouraging districts to continue to continue to conduct site visits, submit projects. At this point, I don't think we have any lines of funding. I know that that's something that the association is working on, but I don't anticipate that we receive any more this year. Definitely kind of that item number 2 that's really important is, please continue to be an advocate on behalf of VCAP, support the legislative agenda with elected officials, and send any relevant grant opportunities to the program. As we move forward, there's some there's some program updates that happened at the beginning of this fiscal year. So previously, the way projects had worked is that if you were on the wait list from one fiscal year to another, then your project would carry over, kind of be grandfathered in. That is no longer the case. So if projects, are on the wait list through June 30th, that next program year, July 1st, they would need to resubmit and would be subject to any program changes. For example, if there's like with permeable pavement this year, the cost share changed from a percentage based to a square footage based payment. So that's an example of how things would change from one year to the other. So that's going to be kind of a big thing moving forward for us. I had begun to work on kind of a program schedule of how I see VCAP and our conservation assistance programs operating with COVID, and then also with program changes to the state program. That's kind of shifted my thinking a little bit more. So I'm still working on updates to that, and that's something I want to, and moving forward, share with the Water Resources Committee to get input about how we're structuring these programs, how we're scheduling site visits, how we're allocating funding, all of those things to make sure that we're kind of as streamlined as possible, that we're not creating confusion or frustration for folks in our district who want to implement these practices. So there is going to be a shift in workload for the steering committee and for the VCAP program. So hopefully we can come up with I think the plan is to have a larger strategic plan for obviously for this year, our annual work plan, but then a larger strategic plan for the next 5 years. We will be sending out a survey link for the program. I think Maura Christensen was working on that. So we should have that by the end of this month. So we highly encourage all district board members to review and have input. This is something that we're going to try and open up to the larger community and receive input. Previously, it had just been sent to districts and boards. Now we're going to be sending it out to past participants, trying to email contractors that we work with to get as much input from all stakeholders as possible, to see, as we're adjusting this program, is there ways that we, finding ways to improve and improve the, providing cost share for everybody.
So 2 comments. One, have we, I've probably mentioned in the past, Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries often has some funding for things like rain gardens and conservation landscaping, but from a wildlife perspective. And there can be some overlap there. I think Carol Heiser is a good contact for that.
Okay.
I don't know if VCAP itself or we as a district have reached out to Carol to see if there's funding opportunities there, particularly for some of these projects that I think of particular interest to Carol are things with education, things at schools or that could have some educational component to them. But that would be something I think that would be a good way to maybe secure some extra funding. The other thing from a previous, I think it might have been from our last in-person meeting, I can't remember, but we talked about changing our scoring system to give more weight, at least for our local programs, to or at least propose to give more weight for things that have a habitat benefit. And we would determine that by participating in one of the habitat programs for someone who's been in either the backyard wildlife habitat program or who's certified, who's participated in the Virginia Department of Game and Inland program. It's anyway, someone who's participated in one of the programs, that we would allocate a certain number of points for participation in one of those programs.
Yeah, and I think that you do bring up a good point, Lonnie. That is something that we talked about, I think in our February meeting. At that point, the program administrator for ACAP, Kim Biasioli, had not been hired yet. So now that she's been hired and has had I think she's definitely had her plate full here. But I've been talking with her, and I think Ann has as well, about different programs throughout the county, relating to climate, relating to a number of things. But that's something I did want to bring back up with Kim for this year. And again, kind of thinking about the larger picture of how our conservation assistance programs operate. Again, with scheduling, with inputs, with outreach. So that's something that I'd like to revisit with them, is because there could be opportunities, like you said, with adding that as a scoring rubric for our local programs. And one thing we do need to be thoughtful with that is that making sure that it isn't adding any additional kind of either burden for, so that's where it gets tricky, is because if we're operating within the state program and then also operating with the local program, thinking about timelines, thinking about, what these items look like. So if you have an idea of what a scoring rubric could be, or what inputs we would want to take in, please send those to me. That way I can kind of plug them into what's already existing, and thinking about how we can either evolve the program or trying to make it a little more seamless, and adding in those scoring items.
Yeah, and someone would have to tinker with the math to figure out what works. I think the problem currently is those permeable paving projects so far outscore the conservation landscaping projects that it can really strip those from ever being considered. And the permeable paving projects are so expensive that you could do a bunch of different conservation landscaping projects for the same amount. So some point total that would make conservation landscaping a bit more competitive. I don't know what that number is, but if you tinker with the numbers, something that would at least make it a bit more competitive is what I would advocate for. I think the nice thing about participation in a wildlife habitat program is that that removes some of the burden from staff to sort of like verify. I mean, they just say, if you have an application, if you're part of one of these programs, attach it. Include it in your application.
So with those types of wildlife programs, is their certification based off of installed or plans? Is it pre or post where they are awarded a pre or post, installation of project where these awards are made or criteria are given? Because I'm thinking about some of the wildlife certification signs that I've seen in folks' yard. Are those based? How are those based, before the project or after the project's completed?
I believe it's based in after the project is completed, and they include other things that we don't typically consider, like habitat considerations. Are you providing access to water, shelter, other things we don't typically think of. But the World Wildlife Fund, I think, might be one of the primary people but I think Wild Ones has another. And as I said, the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. And I don't know if the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries has, I don't know if there's what certification, that'd be a good question for Carol, I guess, but I don't know what's involved in their thing, or even, but I do know that they have been going on.
Okay. Yeah, and I've had this conversation with
I can do some
contractors.
research. I can do some research on that.
Yeah, and I've had some conversation with a few contractors as well, you know, in regards to these projects. There is a lot of overlap in terms of, you know, these are water quality improvement programs. There's obviously a lot of overlap between, you know, native habitats, native plantings, those sort of things. So it's a delicate balance of making sure that we are, you know, providing these programs or these implementing these projects that have, you know, educational value, cost effectiveness, pollutant removal, but then there's also kind of a separate idea about, you know, providing wildlife habitat, providing you know, providing these other items that are definitely co-benefits, but aren't necessarily what these programs are designed, what the VCAP program is designed for. And so that's where that talking with our localities is going to be really important about, you know, as this program evolves, what are our localities' goals, and maybe they start to diverge a little bit from the state program and state funding. So that's
yeah. I mean, it is worth noting that I do sincerely believe Joe Thompson and I might have some difference of opinion on this, but I sincerely believe that when you're doing the right thing for wildlife habitat, you are doing the right thing for water quality. There's been some great research done that even things like invasive species management can benefit streams. For example, a stream with multiflora rows will automatically have a benthic impairment because the native fauna in the stream can't, they depend upon native vegetation just like native insects. So if you don't have native vegetation along the stream, you don't have native benthic macroinvertebrates.
Yeah.
So there are other things like that, like there's been studies on the ability of native plants like Iris virginica to absorb pollutants versus non-natives. And so, I mean, there's data out there about this stuff, but as you say, I mean, in some ways it's simpler just to advocate for wildlife habitat as a co-benefit, because we know that in doing so, it also benefits water quality.
Yeah. And kind of to the point that you made, I guess we were talking about septic, is that trying to find these formulas or numbers and that are, you know, published, that are verified about, you know, putting these inputs in so we can have a pollutant removal, you know, output are very difficult, because I think a lot of those things are just now beginning to be studied. So something we can definitely keep an eye on, but would be hard to implement in our ranking as it stands. But yeah, maybe doing a wildlife program or incorporating that would work.
I do think the another consideration when we go to the localities is, because climate change is an important consideration for them as well. Maybe something the climate committee should consider is, you know, is there a VCAP benefit to some of our, is there a climate benefit to some of our VCAP practices? And if so,
right,
which VCAP practices have the most climate benefit?
Yeah,
So,
and I think, and that's something to bring up, and I brought that up with Ann, is that, you know, as these programs are evolving and we're trying to talk with our localities about what their goals are, and climate is certainly one of them. You know, maybe that's where the ACAP program begins to shift a little bit. You know, obviously tackling water quality, but maybe it's also about, you know, climate issues or habitat. So I think, yeah, that's definitely something that we need to try and figure out. And if we could get, I think the climate committee involved as well, that would be helpful in addressing what the goals are and what tools that we have here at the district to kind of help with that.
What was very interesting that it's even on the state agencies, it's on their radar, and they're using language talking about co-benefits of BMPs. So I think this notion of getting outside the bubble of thinking of just in terms of water quality, but also like what other benefits can we provide while we're addressing water quality is definitely on the radar of, you know, DEQ and other agencies.
Mhm. Okay, well, that's definitely something I want to continue to work through and talk with for this year, but also and moving forward. But talk with you know, Laura Williamson and Kim Biasioli at Albemarle County, and then talking with Melissa Stevens at the city with these programs and program changes. Or maybe where we see the, you know, the future of these programs going. So and kind of an update to that. So with our local programs, with CCAP, Mary was on the Water Resources Protection Committee for the city. She is going to be stepping down from that role, but I have put in my application to join that steering committee. Hopefully, I think they're meeting. The city is meeting tonight to approve committees or committee appointments. So hopefully I should hear something after today or shortly thereafter about whether my application was accepted. So, but I look forward to joining that group and trying to, you know, really give them some of my in the field experiences and what, you know, how people view the CCAP program, how they view water resources, and just I think it'll be good to kind of fill committee members in about where this program is and where it's heading. So as we're kind of moving along here, I had sent this update, I believe last month or a month prior, just about VCAP program updates and program changes. Some of these items we've already discussed a little bit, but I wanted to highlight a few important program changes for this year. As I said, if a funding backlog occurs during a program year, which it currently is, the steering committee will review based on possible future funding for the year, which is obviously at a standstill right now. The important piece is that any applications on a wait list at the end of the program year will be subject to new program year guidelines, including policy, cost share rates, and BMP specifications. This may require additional information on new application before review. So that's kind of, that point is something that I'm working on as far as our scheduling for site visits and applications, because as we draw closer to the end of the year, especially the last couple months where we're talking about April, May, June, you know, people are really getting excited about transforming their yard. They're thinking about, you know, gardening. They're thinking about, you know, doing stuff on their property. That's the time when we're starting to run up against, or in previous years had been running up against funding program issues. And now that the projects cannot carry over to the next year on a wait list, I'm thinking about maybe shifting some of those, you know, those months to doing program updates, to doing, we can still do additional outreach, but maybe not accepting projects during that time. One, to, you know, make sure we're not disappointing anybody who's expecting funding, but also to do maintenance to the program. You know, there are spot checks that need to happen. Our program has really done well over the last few years, and so we've seen a, you know, with an increase in projects comes an increase in maintenance. So the number of spot checks that need to be conducted are you know, are ever growing, and making sure that these projects that as they're installed are continuing to function properly. So that's something that I'm going to be sharing with the Water Resources Committee here in the coming months about how these schedules are going to be operating.
Could we just delay their application, have them submit it to us and then delay our submission to VCAP?
Potentially. The problem that I see there a little bit is that, so if someone from Fluvanna County wants to install a rain garden at their house. Currently, they're not, the way the program is operating now, I don't foresee us getting any funding. They're not going to get funded through the end of July. So if they're having to hire someone to say put the application or put the design together to do, you know, a host of other things, they're putting in, and that's kind of gets back to providing some kind of do-it-yourself resources. But you know, they could do all this work and then not receive funding by the end of the year. So it's just kind of managing expectations a little bit about where our program is and kind of where things go. So because even if they were to apply, say, you know, reapply July 1st, there's still not any guaranteeing that their project would be funded based on their ranking score. So it could be, you know, just because the new program year starts July 1st, there's still a chance that they might not get funded, you know, through the next year. So how we remedy that, I'm not sure. And like I said, that's something that I'd like to have a larger discussion about the program, you know, with more input from the committee.
Thanks.
So one update to permeable pavement. I know, Lonnie, you had touched on this a little earlier. The effective cost share rate for permeable pavement is now based on square footage. So to kind of help, you know, reduce the amount that the program is spending on these permeable pavement practices, but still being fair, providing enough cost share that they do get installed, because they do provide, you know, a great service as far as pollutant removal, you know, cost per area installed, as well as impervious area treated. So now that rate has been dropped down to a square footage, so $10 per square foot with a maximum payment of $10,000. I think that's helping curb a little bit as far as, you know, just replacing maybe an entire driveway, or, you know, installing a back patio just for the sake of wanting to install a patio. I think that, you know, with this cost share adjustment, it has kind of maybe done a little bit of correction. And I think even, I think Maura from the VCAP program did a cost analysis. I'll have to look for that, about how much, by making this cost share change this year, how much the program has saved, and allowing for additional projects to be installed instead of our previous cost share rate. So it's definitely something that's been good to add. Another item that has been updated, applicants, including any entity or a member of the same household, will be limited to $50,000 in cost share. Applicants are only eligible to receive up to the cost share cap for each BMP type, regardless of resource concern or program year per parcel. So essentially, if someone, you know, last year installed a rain garden on their front side of their house, and now they want to install a rain garden on in their backyard, unfortunately, if they've already reached the cost share cap, that's something that they would have to do on their own. So that's the program type, or cost share type per parcel, for in perpetuity for the program. Kind of moving a little bit from the state program to the local program. This schedule here that I've highlighted, this is going for the remainder of the year. This is going to be the project submittal and approval deadlines. Basically operating on a quarterly schedule. And the reason being because there is no state funding. These would be approved by the locality, or approved with locality funding. We'll still be using the ranking score, the ranking spreadsheets, to kind of prioritize projects each quarter. I would anticipate the way, you know, with the number of site visits that I'm still conducting and the number of projects that I'm receiving, not complete yet, but still in kind of application process. I would anticipate that we'll probably be coming up against, you know, being out of funding for maybe even both programs by the December 31st, or shortly after, or then the following quarter, in the third quarter by March 31st. So
Hey,
that's just
Chris,
kind of
I
my,
have a-
yeah.
I have a couple thoughts. Sorry, I had to run to the ladies' room, and I think you guys were talking about for locale for landowners that are outside the ACAP, CCAP that are in our like Flavanna, Louisa, etc. I actually have kind of was rethinking how we might want to say it. Because when I read Kevin's email that came out about how they want to encourage everybody to keep, you know, encouraging signups and encouraging this and keep going on site visits. I also my first reaction is that's sort of unfair if we're going to tell people, well, you can do all this work, but we can't guarantee you anything until next summer. However, I've started to rethink it a little bit based on my diabetes doctor sort of story. If we pitch it instead as a, hey, guess what? We are now taking signups for next year. Or, you know, hey, you've got some time to, you know, if you're interested in a project, we are now, you know, we will be looking for applications. So, and then I know this could be confusing, but I was thinking about your timeline. What I've heard from some other districts that have that same sort of June 1st through September deadline. Now that's for VCAP. By the time they got all their applications in, the money obviously had run out. So for ACAP and CCAP, I could see you may have a different schedule for that group of people. But I'm wondering for the VCAP one, I certainly don't want to complicate your life, but I feel like I'm wondering if the application sign up period for VCAP should be April 1st through, or, you know, whatever time period, so that when June 1st hits or July 1st hits, you are ready to roll on those early months of the VCAP funding. Because if you wait till September, like I said, some other districts did, then the money was gone. And I could probably guess that's going to happen again, at least next year. So, you know, I don't want to complicate your life by having an ACAP, CCAP window and then a VCAP window, because that's going to be really confusing for people. But maybe just something to consider. And then turn it into a, hey, you know, starting, I don't know, January 1st, we're going to be accepting applications from January 1st through March 31st. And then we'll be doing site visits from April through June. And I know you've got other things on your radar to be working on in the spring. So we might have, you know, I can help you with workload, or, you know, maybe we can shift some things, and Audrey might be able to help, etc. Anyway, in my mind, I was thinking about that, about how we want to try to pitch something as a positive.
Yeah.
And, you know, and so could we turn it into instead of, oh, well, we don't have any money, how about, hey, let's get you ready for next year.
Yeah, I mean, it's also important to think too about planting schedules. You don't want to install plants in June, July, August. You want to install them in spring or fall. So anything that involves plants, I mean, you want to try and encourage those practices to be installed in spring or fall.
Absolutely.
So,
well,
I
but
mean,
yeah,
keeping
and
in
if they
time
don't
the
get
timing of the projects as well. You know.
right, and if they don't get funded, then they don't get a project at all. So funding's, yeah. So what's the best schedule for funding, and then what's the best, you know, the best schedule for project?
Yeah,
Chris?
and just so everyone knows, so Ann and I had talked about a schedule. I kind of put together a preliminary schedule of how I saw the year going. That was in July, or I've been working on it in June and July, and that kind of all went out the window once I found out that we were out of funding, or once I found out basically in July that we were likely to be out of funding in August, because then that shifts my focus from okay, let's maybe do projects in the spring. But now funding might be out, but then those projects that say that if I'm to work with them in the spring to get them ready for the next fiscal year, they're subject to new program year guidelines and policies and cost share rates and all those things. So it's still something I'm kind of racking my brain a little bit, but I wanted to bring that up is so that the committee could kind of see how the program's operating and what we're up against a little bit, because I do want to turn it into a positive. I don't want to stop receiving projects or stop working on site visits or those things. I'm just trying to figure out how to align, these 3 conservation assistance programs. And so I'm not operating three different programs. But also, it's a tricky balance.
It's super tricky, Chris. And I didn't mean to say you weren't being positive. I personally was like, my first reaction is from a workload perspective. I'm like, we can't be advertising a program that we don't have funding for. That would be wrong. I don't want you doing, a bunch of site visits and then tell people, well, too bad, we don't have any money. You might maybe next year you'll get it. But I do, and I also see that that's a huge challenge of how do you develop a really good project when you don't know, come June 1st, the rules could change. Like permeable pavers. If you had been designing a permeable paver project with somebody in April, May, and June, had it all dialed in, and then come June 1st, they were like, oh, we've decided we're going to completely change how much money you get. Well, then you will have sunk a lot of time and energy into a project that just may go away. And that's a real risk. Obviously,
and from experience, there were 2 projects like that. Is where I've been working. I had done a site visit in April, and these 2 projects have finally gotten to the point. And then they submitted, and they submitted a little too late. They're in the July 1st, round of funding, and they said, with the cost share that's available, we can't make this work. So I know with grant cycles, Kevin may not have any wiggle room, but would you ask, and maybe it's already been asked, would you ask the steering committee the next time you guys meet if those program changes could occur in the winter instead of the spring, so that if they all were to change on January 1st, okay.
But I don't know. I know that if it comes from DEQ and the grant requirements, the funding, the grant cycle starts on a certain date, you may not have the ability to change it. But if it's DCR money, I don't know. I guess it's just, and how many big program changes do they think? I mean, as Lonnie pointed out earlier, this program is not brand new anymore. We've been doing a lot of tweaking for a number of years now. Is the dust ever going to settle enough that you could have some level of confidence? Because otherwise, how are you going to, if your application period is, and I know you said you were thinking about this before they ran out of money in September. So things have changed, and also maybe find out how Northern Virginia is going to handle it, because I think they're in the same situation, right? They had their schedule similar to the one that you posted, and clearly that probably is not going to work for them.
Yeah, and so that's something I've been working with or being in touch with Northern Virginia, Henricopolis, and Shenandoah Valley, because they operate the Harrisonburg Conservation Assistance Program as well. But so I've been in touch with other districts and how how they had previously scheduled things, and then updating, talking to Northern Virginia in particular about how they're going to be moving forward with some of their programs, because they also received a cut in funding from their locality to implement some of these practices. So, well,
Chris, I just congratulate you, applaud you, and thank you for looking at how all of this is not, it's not just as simple as, hey, we have money, you guys sign up and we'll we're here to help. We'll just send us out on a site visit. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes, and I just can't thank you enough for being on top of it. And I I hope that you will I know you will, but I'm looking forward to hearing what you find out and figuring out
Yeah.
something that makes your life. I also don't want you running 3 programs. That is definitely not going to be efficient. Maybe you end up having to do a little bit of a difference between VCAP and ACAP, but
Mhm.
I hope that you can figure something out, and I have confidence that you will.
Thank you. Yeah, we're getting there. So I've definitely been, and I think at our next steering committee meeting for VCAP, we're focusing on a strategic plan, as well as continue an annual work plan for this year. So I think after that meeting, I'm hoping to have a little clearer picture as to how the VCAP program is going to be operating for this year, but also in the coming years. So that way we're not having to do a lot of this kind of guessing game and program changes and those types of things. So so hopefully I have an update. But
Well,
yeah, thanks for the vote of confidence. I appreciate that.
yeah, it's you're like threading a needle with a whole lot of items. So we're here to support you, and certainly I think if you have any more, if you want to run by, if you want to change that schedule or come up with like options, A, B, and C,
Mm-hmm.
or just let us know where we can help.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so that's something I'll be providing. That's today was just a general overview. I know it's a lot of information, but yeah, just want to kind of get those out to Water Resources Committee members to be thinking about, and know what funding levels are for a program or program changes. But that'll be something that we will be working on moving forward and getting input about how these programs operate. So greatly appreciated for any input or thoughts. So that's kind of my big picture updates for VCAP and CCAP and ACAP. I know we had a lot of discussion. It's a little past 11 here, and I got to be heading out here soon for a site visit. But does anybody have any other quick items about these program changes or any questions that hopefully I can answer?
No, I just appreciate it, and people could send an email if they've got any follow-up questions. When you get the minutes, it'd be helpful if you could send those sooner than later, so that if we do want to wordsmith any of those sort of Lonnie's ideas,
Okay.
Lonnie will have a chance to maybe jump in and do a little red line if we didn't capture everything exactly right. I don't know that we always do.
Yeah.
But yeah, that'd be good to do before they get sent before the minutes get sent to the board meeting.
Okay.
Good to do that in advance.
That sounds good.
And I will find out what we hear on the number of committee members, and I'll be reporting that back to all committees.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I just want to echo Ann's, congratulations and, and thank you to the whole staff about the tremendous work you're doing. And with that, I'll make the motion, we adjourn.
I'll second.
Okay, motion carries. All right. Well, thank you all. I appreciate it, and look forward to talking with you again soon.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.